I stare at the window.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Dram show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, this afternoon, now the tasting that I had planned to do this afternoon, unfortunately I'm not doing because one of the samples hasn't turned up. But I'm not exactly short of a few bits and pieces to share with you. So this afternoon we will be looking at something different, obviously, and we will obviously, as you can tell from the intro picture, we'll be looking at the Glengyle distillery in Campbeltown. So interesting tasting. We'll be looking at some of their whiskies, and I think this is probably the first. Yeah, I'm pretty certain this is the first episode of the show that I've done on Glengyle. So as we normally do, a little bit of a potted history. Right, so, well, Campbeltown, it's the sticky outy bit on the west coast of Scotland, as I often refer to it as. Interestingly enough, once upon a time was kind of like the hotbed of the distilling industry in Scotland. I believe that over the years there was probably around about 40 odd different distilleries, of which about half were in production at any one given time. And when you consider that the area was relatively small, I think the inhabitants number about 5,500. 40 odd distilleries or 20 odd distilleries in production at any one given time is pretty impressive. Apparently, it was quite, again, not just a hotbed of the whisky distilling industry, but also fishing, coal mining, and other such associated stuff. So. Why did it fall out of favour? What happened to the might of Campbeltown? Well, according to the book, the downturn began around about the First World War. Like obviously, a lot of the production of produce in not just Scotland but obviously the UK dipped during the war years or the First World War, secondly, the closures around about the sort of the 1930s with the problems that the country was suffering at the time, the depression and all that kind of stuff. So, and then you got the Second World War again. That obviously stripped more skilled labour out of Scotland. As we know, a number of other distilleries closed. And suddenly, before you knew it, there was only two distilleries left, that being obviously Springbank and the other one, which whose name just completely and utterly eludes me. But anyway, yeah, the other, they probably hate that being known as the other distillery. So anyway, we're not talking about Glen Scotia. Glen Scotia, that's the one. Anyway. Get there in the end. We're talking about Glengyle, which was originally built in 1872 by one William Mitchell, who I believe was related to the current owner and the current owner of Springbank Distillery, Headley Wright. So built in 1872, went through a few hands, as often is the case. And was closed in 1925. Then it again went through a few hands, but I don't believe it ever started distilling again. I think from what I was reading that the buildings were purchased and the whole thing turned into a petrol station, I believe. So it was back in 2000 when Springbank or Headley Wright purchased the distillery, and of course there was absolutely nothing there at all, apart from obviously the building, so they had to buy in stills and what have you. I believe the stills came from Ben Wyvis. They had obviously a lot of new stuff built, and production started in March of 2004. First release was in 2007 as a 3-year-old, which I think was only made available to the Springbank Society, I think. and then the following year, no, 2009, I hate to say, they started releasing the distillery bottlings, starting with a 5-year-old, which they called Work in Progress 1, and each year they've released another Work in Progress. So I believe that the plan is eventually to release a 12-year-old, and then that'll probably be it. It'll be just a core 12-year-old, and that will be the end of the Work in Progress series. So it's been interesting tasting the series. Certainly, I remember the first bottling being very good. You know, young, youthful, plenty of cereal, lots of sweet barley, really nice kind of character to it. I think sort of second Work in Progress 2 went through a bit of a funny phase, but certainly kind of came back on track. So. And has been evolving ever since, really, and it's evolved fairly quickly. I think it was certainly a fairly light spirit. I believe that when they bought the stills, they tampered with them, brought the lin arm down a little bit, so greater reflux, and a lighter style of spirit. As far as I'm aware, it's unpeated, it's, you know, double distilled, and you know, all round, I think really interesting. So it's good. I think this is going to be quite an interesting tasting. So I think that's enough waffling. So I'll introduce this afternoon to the lineup.
Never forget me.
Okay, so what difference does a year make? That, I guess, is going to be the interesting question for this particular tasting, because we will be tasting both the Work in Progress 5 now, and 6. As you probably know, that suddenly they kind of did a bit of a long row thing, where the Work in Progress 1 to 4 was just, I believe, American Oak, a single release, and then suddenly Work in Progress 5, out comes an American Oak version and a sherry cask version, and yeah, really interesting. And I know that a few years ago, probably quite more than a few years ago in actual fact, the long row used to be released like that. The long row used to be released as a sherry cask matured spirit and a bourbon cask spirit. So yeah, it's not unheard of for Springbank to kind of do that thing. So basically we have Work in Progress 5 both in bourbon, Work in Progress 6 in bourbon, and Work in Progress 5 and 6 aged in sherry casks. So now, Work in Progress 5, I believe, is 9 years of age, and obviously Work in Progress 6 is obviously 10, so only a couple more years to go before they release it as a standard 12-year-old. So let's see what the difference 1 year makes between the two spirits then.
Memories, they keep you near.
Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Work in Progress Bourbon. Now this is going to be really interesting because I've not tasted these side by side. I mean, I had planned to do this particular tasting back when Work in Progress 5 was released last year, but as these things tend to go, I didn't manage to fit it in. So it's kind of quite apt now that Work in Progress 6 has been released. So let's look at Work in Progress 5 then, shall we? Quite fresh. Lots of white fruit, quite salty, really coastal. Again, it's got some lovely sweet barley, little perfume note, white fruit, little white flower note, slight toasted oak note, but very slight. So obviously been aged in refilled American oak casks. Really shimmering barley. Really, it's a lovely nose. I've liked Kilkerran ever since I first tasted it, and like a number of distilleries, it seems to have been drinkable, you know, from quite an early age, which I suppose is quite handy if you're a distillery owner. Got a lovely sweetness now, a bit of orange, sort of nectarine-y sort of kind of character, a little bit of light sort of, not syrupy sweetness, but that kind of sweetness. But wow, it's got a Campbeltown salts on the finish, I can tell you that for a start. Again, fairly full, sort of medium bodied-ish, lots of fleshy fruit, apricot, tangerine, satsuma, slightly more towards the orangey end of the citrus spectrum. Not mega complex, but it has some lovely depth, a little bit of bite, like I said, from the alcohol, plenty of saltiness certainly on the finish, but after that saltiness kind of fades, it leaves this lovely sweet, slightly honeyed barley flavour in the mouth, and it's like, oh, that is really nice. Little bit of smoke I'm getting right on the finish, just a little waft, and I mean, I don't think, well, I'm pretty certain that the barley is unpeated that they use for this, but it's just a little smidgen of smoke there right at the very end. So Work in Progress 5 was very good.
It's been a year now.
So on to Work in Progress 6. So what does an extra year in the cask give us then? Oilier, a little bit more fishy. The tannins seem to be a little bit more prominent. They're not closed it in, but you can certainly feel on the nose that there's a little bit more, oak, a bit more sort of coffee tannins, which is kind of just taking the edge slightly off the voluptuous fruit from Work in Progress 5. Still, there's some honey, there's a little bit of white fruit, a little bit of a floral note. I'm also getting a little bit more iodine, more intensely kind of salty. Well, not necessarily salty, more maritime, less not salty, but that sort of iodine-y, seaweedy. There's even a sort of an intimation of peat, and I don't think that it's not proper peat. I know that sounds a bit daft, but it's that kind of, you know, when you sort of taste a peated malt, certainly from an island or from Islay, the kind of like the flavours that kind of go hand in hand with peat, the iodine, seaweed, medicinal, etc., etc. Almost kind of like sort of when you smell that, you know, you almost kind of get led down that sort of path, and you sort of think, yeah, where's the peat, you know? Maybe that's what it's kind of doing, but there's a little bit of crystallised violet. It's, dare I say it, this is actually getting very much more like Springbank, and it's possibly that violety note, the slightly more heavier wood character, which is giving it that kind of Springbank-esque kind of feel to it, which is really interesting. But, you know, absolutely lovely bottling, really nice nose. Palate? Chewy, malty, a lot more wood notes, wood tannins, dry. I swear there is a dusty peat note there. I mean, it's possible. I mean, I don't know this, and I'm just going to sort of make an assumption that maybe they have been distilling some peated spirit. Wouldn't surprise me, given that the popularity of peated malt whiskies. Maybe some of that has crept in along the lines. Maybe, you know, obviously when you make a peated spirit, you know, it's going to infuse, you know, all the stills, the spirit charger, etc., etc. So possibly there's some residue coming through there, but it's got that Springbanky kind of character to it. You know, like I said, the wood notes, the coffee tannins, the bite, the dryness. Like I said, kind of, I guess, taken the edge off the fruit a little bit. I certainly don't think that they've used any newer oak, because there's no obvious new oak, buttery, creamy, caramelly kind of character. It's still refilled American oak, but it's just got that little bit more grittiness. Maybe it's just, you know, an extra year in the wood has just pulled out a bit more of those tannins. Maybe it's just the casks. Maybe it's just a selection. Who knows? But different, yeah, quite different from each other, but really interesting. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look at the Work in Progress 5 sherry. All these incidentally bottled at 46%, no chill filtration, etc., 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 as you'd expect from a quality operation. As you can probably see from the colour, again, I don't think we're looking at first fill Bourbon, first fill Oloroso. I think we're definitely looking at refill sherry casks. So let's see what the nose gives us then. Slightly nutty, quite high toned. Again, actually has more in common with the Work in Progress 5 Bourbon, with that slightly high-toned white fruits, honey, and just sitting in the background a little bit of refill sherry, adding a bit of richness, a little bit of dried fruit, some maltiness, a little bit more robust than the Bourbon oak version, but full, touch of toffee. Quite a lot of toffee in actual fact coming through now, so maybe American oak sherry, possibly. Maybe it's American oak that's been seasoned with sherry, maybe, rather than being an actual sherry or sherry butts, possibly. I don't know. It's certainly a very subtle sherry character, which is quite nice, and it's just adding a little bit of richness, which is what I like. I like that type of sherry matured spirit. So it's not huge blanketing Oloroso. It's just adding that little bit of interest, a little bit of dried fruit. So nice nose. A little bit more noticeable sherry character on the palate, more dried fruits, raisins, a bit of prune, sultana, but again not too heavy. You know, quite subtle, quite balanced. Again, it's got some nice fleshy fruits, a touch of apricot, a little bit of nuts, little bit of saltiness, and a lovely fresh finish. A little bit of that violety note coming through. Yeah, it's very much like the Bourbon edition, but with that sort of like little bit of sherry richness added to it. And I think subtle, nicely done, really well balanced. So yeah, I think that's really impressive. And finally, let's take a look at the Work in Progress 6 in sherry. Again, pretty light in colour, so I'm again guessing predominantly, or if not completely, refill sherry casks. So see what the nose gives us. Quite dusty. Again, it's got quite a bit of tannin, but it's sort of soft, dusty tannins. Possibly a little heavier on the sherry notes. A little bit more of that sort of dried, rich fruit. Certainly there feels like there's a sort of slight iodine-y, light medicinal, almost kind of dusty, peaty note in the background. I don't know whether that's just just my imagination, or whether it actually is there. Whether they, you know, like I said to you, whether they have started using a little bit of peat, I don't know. Probably should have asked. But it's definitely got a little bit more rich character to it. I mean, maybe that extra year in the cask is what's done it. You know, it has brought out that more sort of tannic character. It'll be interesting to see whether that's, you know, when we taste the 11-year-old and the 12-year-old, whether that's the sort of direction that the spirit actually moves in, and maybe it's going to be one of those sort of spirits that probably is going to be at its best, you know, in its relatively younger stages. You know, maybe when it gets to about sort of, you know, 15, 16 years old, it's possibly going to be a little bit too much on the woody side. It's, who knows? I mean, maybe again it's sort of down to the cask selection, I suppose. But it's got a nice, like, treacle, bit of toffee, bit of sort of almost molassy like richness to it. But again, like I said, it's all light, it's balanced, it's, you know, yeah, it's nice, it's good. Palate. It definitely tastes like some peat there, I can tell you that. Right on the finish, just that little bit of earthy, violety, springbanky kind of peat note. Again, yeah, it's slightly heavier on the sherry. It's more dusty, it's more tannic. Again, it's going more in a kind of springbanky kind of way, you know, with that sort of, you know, grippy, tannic, coffee tannin kind of character. Plenty of dried fruits again. Not a huge Oloroso monster by any stretch of the imagination. Again, quite balanced, quite subtle. Nice saltiness on the finish. Again, quite freshy. You're sort of getting some barley character, a little bit of citrus. But although the emphasis is more on the sherry, it's certainly not overly done on the sherry, I think. So yeah, another really interesting malt. Yeah, really nice. I really like it. You know, it's very, very good. So yeah, good stuff.
Would you be proud of me?
Okay, so let's sum this little tasting up. So a year in the wood, does it make a great deal of difference? Well, it certainly seems to in this case. It's gone from being fairly sort of like fleshy. Certainly, if you look at the work in progress bourbon, to having more of that sort of coffee, dusty, tannin kind of note. Now, like I said, whether that's purely, you know, what's happened between, you know, year 9 and year 10, difficult to say. I'd be surprised that a year would make so much really noticeable difference. So it's probably more down to the casks that we use, and that's just the way that those casks have kind of, you know, matured. I mean, of course, as we all know, you know, maturation is, you know, a fairly imprecise science. You stick your spirit in a barrel, and you know, you taste it from, or nose it, as the case may be, from time to time to see how it's evolving. And of course, every cask will evolve slightly differently. So, but it's interesting to see that similarity between 5 and 6 was pretty much the same in the American and the bourbon oak as it was in the sherry casks. And another interesting thing is that it does seem to be moving more in a springbank direction. A little, like I said, more of that kind of coffee tannins, and certainly the sherry matured version was certainly displaying quite a bit of it. You know, the violety notes, the salt. You know, maybe it's subliminal. Maybe it's just kind of me, just sort of thinking like that. But I certainly think that it seems to be moving in a sort of a springbanky kind of direction. Although the production methods and the distillation methods are different Although obviously the same staff run both distilleries, but you know, just because the same people run the distillery doesn't mean it's necessarily going to turn out the same style of spirit, obviously. But anyway, coming back to the quality, I think this is just, you know, very, very good quality. I think it's been, you know, really nice since the day it's been released. It's not the most complex malt on the planet. I don't think it ever is going to be. But it delivers, it has depth, and it is really enjoyable. It's a lovely malt, and I don't think very many people are aware of the existence of it. I think that those that are obviously enjoy it, and I think I hope that you know, for those of you that are watching the show that have never tasted you know, Kilkerran before, you'll at least give it a shot, because I think it's definitely really interesting. It's always, I often sell it as a point of difference. It's not particularly expensive. It's what, mid-30s, you know, and I think you could do an awful lot worse for that kind of money. So so yeah, I think Kilkerran Glengyle is really, really interesting, and hopefully you'll give it a try, and hopefully you'll think the same as well. So anyway, that's probably about enough for this week's episode of the show. So all that's left to say is good afternoon and good drinking.